This is Paul Harris. He's our 17th District Legislative Representative, and we're going to talk about budget.
Oh, the big hole, the big hole,
Okay,
David.
and this is a time when budget is a very difficult thing to deal with. Our state, Washington here, has how much of a deficit?
We're at about a $5.3 billion deficit. Just last week, the forecast came out, and we have another estimate of about $800 million that we added to it that we didn't know where we were.
So that's 5.3
So we're at
plus
5.3. No, 5.3 includes the 800 million that we miscalculated on revenues.
So that's a B with a B. That's a billion.
Billion.
That's $5,300 million deficit. Well,
deficit.
If that's the deficit, how much is the entire budget?
The entire budget for the 2-year biennium runs about 30. Well, we're just going to round off and say it's $30 billion for 2 years.
Oh, say okay.
So $15 billion a year to operate the state.
So this is 2011.
2011.
$30 billion for biannual budget.
Biannual budget.
Okay, what was it about 4, 5, 6 years ago? Have we gone up or has it gone down? Has this recession really cut it down a lot?
We actually, well, if we're going to go back 5 or 6 years,
Or pick a time when we were healthy.
We've increased the budget 33% in the last 5 years.
One third.
1/3. Okay, so revenues were great. You know what's interesting, David? You're like in our last segment, which I guess we can't talk about, but anyway.
You can talk about it.
Yeah.
Sure. Go ahead.
Well, you've been very successful during these bad times. Your business has done well. The state, what is interesting is when times were good and revenues were good, the state spent their money, and they continued to spend it. When times were bad, which has been the last 2 years, what the state thought was, well, it's bad, but it's going to get better. So we're just going to kind of tweak little things, but it's going to get better next year. And
so there's no reserve? They're just
Oh, there's no reserve. There's no reserve. In fact, not only is there not any reserve, David, what we did is when times were bad, they swept the money out of all the funds to pay. So any money that they did have that were in certain funds that they could take and legally take, they took those monies and spent them. Okay?
I can't imagine. I mean, as a business owner, I make sure we always have reserve because you don't know what the future is going to be like. You could very well end up with a case where you've got to live on that reserve to get you through a hump, a dip.
Yeah, I understand.
And that's not normal for the way our government runs?
No. It should have been, but it is not. And not only that, they kind of stuck their head in the sand and figured it's not going to be bad for long and we're going to be okay.
So they're overly optimistic.
And they're overly optimistic in all projections, and they're overly optimistic right now. And so they took one-time federal money and state money, and last year paid down the debt, fixed that problem. Well, the one-time money, guess what, Dave? It's one-time money, so it's gone. And so now we got the same problem we had last year because we never addressed that problem. It's back. In fact, it's back and it's worse. And so we're not going to get any good old Obama free money because there is no money.
The federal government is more broke than the state.
Exactly right. And so we can't take one-time money and think we're going to create or fix a problem because it's one time. And when you have a problem, especially a budget problem, and it's just kind of like saying, oh, I've got a house payment, but I've got enough money to cover that house payment this month and not worried about next month because I got one-time money for it. Well, we still have the same problem we had last year, and now it's worse. And so we're in a budget crisis. And today, I'm waiting for the Democrats. We have a Republican budget that's out of our House that's ready to go. It's written. It balances the budget. It does it without any increases in revenues on existing funds coming into the state. Is it going to change life for people in the state of Washington? It absolutely is.
So you have a proposed budget by the Democrats and a proposed budget
We don't have a proposed budget by the Democrats yet. I'm waiting to see that.
Okay,
we have a budget.
So in the party politics up there, the Republicans have gotten together and they have put together a proposed budget that will balance the budget, not raise taxes, and obviously must cut.
Absolutely,
right?
It cuts.
But you live in with your means. I mean, you don't have a choice, right?
I don't have a choice.
At some point, the deficit can't continue, right? I mean, there is a limit as to how much money that the state can borrow. Or is the state? Is there a debt?
We're not borrowing money. We're living on existing revenues, so we're
Okay.
not out. We're not out. But what's
that
interesting,
open-
you say that. One of the suggestions was to actually kind of take out a second mortgage, was to take some revenues that we have and bond those revenues and take the money and bring it into the budget and pay it down that
Don't
way.
we have a state constitution that says you can't do that?
Well, we do, but there's a majority party that could do that. But they were smart enough to realize that the voters of the state of Washington do not want to do that. In fact, the voters of the state of Washington, if you look in the last election, well, we had an income tax on there, and it went down in resounding defeat,
Yes, I
state
remember
income
that.
tax. In fact, almost every taxing issue that was tried went down in resounding defeat. And the voters of the state of Washington told us something in the last election. They said, we do not want to increase taxes. We want the state of Washington to exist on existing revenues, and you balance that budget. And we're going to do that.
And that actually happened nationally.
It did.
That's why we've got 60-some new House members in Congress, in the United States Congress, mainly for that theme. People are tired of being taxed to death, and they don't have the money to pay those kind of taxes. So what happens when there's a deficit, and the time keeps marching on, and you get to the point where, and you're not going to borrow money, you're going to run out of money. What happens?
So
what does the state do?
Well, we're going to shut down some programs. We're going to take a look at the priorities of government. We're going to decide what government should be involved in and what it shouldn't.
How far can you go with things the way they are, without where there's nothing left in the checkbook?
Well, we balanced. We're balanced. We did a supplemental budget where we did some cuts. Actually, I don't know.
So currently, the state's not going to run out of money. They're currently
No.
so
Currently, we made some cuts actually in the very beginning of the session in January.
Okay.
We did a supplemental budget where we cut out some more expenditures.
And that's because the Constitution the state Constitution required
The state
that?
Constitution requires us to have a balanced budget. We have to have a balanced budget.
Okay, so the new budget you're talking about takes over when? In
June. Starts in
this
June.
June.
This
So
June.
you got several months.
We got a couple months here to get this thing in line. And so, and it's going to happen. We're going to balance this budget. I wish we could get it done in time. I think there's going to be some political games played. We literally have a budget in our back pocket that's ready to go that could balance it. But I think you're going to see the state legislature take its sweet time. And the reason is because there's going to be some programs cut, programs that people have worked on their entire lives to establish. Mm-hmm. Some of them are good programs, I'll be honest. There's going to be some good things that are going to be cut out of this budget. But I got to be honest with you. We're going to have to take some lean times there for a while, reset the button, and decide really where we want government, what we want government to be involved in, and where the things that we need to be involved in, and the things we shouldn't be involved in.
Yeah, I was at the recent town hall meeting, the 49th District Town Hall meeting, and Jim Moeller was there, and along with the other representatives there, and one by one, people came up to the microphone, and so many of them were saying, "I don't want you to cut here. This is a compassionate program. Please keep that. Don't cut that. Don't cut that." Yet we have this $1 billion in light rail that they want to spend on this thing. Thinking, well, wait a minute. Why are we actually cutting compassionate programs, and then we've got these other things that are really non-essential, putting money into that kind of thing? That seems doesn't seem sensible to me.
It's a strange world because you look at it. The federal government has no money, and yet probably $800 million of that light rail is federal money. So they look at it as like, well, we're going to build you that light rail, but you're just going to have to maintain it and operate it because we're not going to give you any money for that. Oh, and by the way, it's never going to pay for itself on that operational side. So you better figure out a way to pay for that. But we're going to give you that project, and you just figure out how to operate it.
Like it's free money.
Like it's free money.
And we are the federal government.
We are
coming
absolutely.
from us.
And the same thing happens on the state side. We have all these programs where the federal government or somebody comes in, nice gesture. Hey, we're going to give you $500 million here to start this program. Maybe it's a basic health program.
And it comes with strings.
It comes with strings
and
for
I'm
a while.
Being quacked at.
You're gonna whack,
I'm gonna
whack.
turn off my phone here. Okay.
Anyway, it might come with strings, or what's even worse, David, what we talked about earlier, it comes one time, or it comes for a 2-year period. And we start this program, and we get these people on a basic health program, or an in-home assistance program, And we start it, and you know what? It's not a bad program. So we do it for 2 years, and all of a sudden we realize, wow, that money's gone. We got to keep that program going. So we.
And there's no expiration date on those programs.
No, oh no, no. It's a good program, David. It's a good program.
But every good program needs to be able to have a reliable source of funds.
So we grab some money from somewhere, or we do a little tax here and a little tax there, and all of a sudden we've got that thing funded. Times are good. Doesn't really matter. It's a good program. Well, we're not in good times now. And some of those programs, to be honest with you, it was never the role of government to do those things.
That's 3 words. The role of government was it? 4 words.
Whatever.
Those are words I don't often hear from any level of government. Is it the proper role of government to do this or that? Because for years, up to the point where these relatively new programs were created, they didn't exist, and people got by, and neighbors helped neighbors, and we had a volunteerism, and that's the kind of thing sounds like we need to get back to, where we can help each other as a community, and the government really cannot afford to be the compassionate source of funds. People themselves are the compassionate source of help to each other.
We need to rely on our families. We need to rely on our churches, and we need to rely on one another. We need to extend our hand out to other people. But the government cannot do what it's been trying to do, and it shouldn't have done what it's tried to do in many cases.
Well, if you're going to try to balance the budget, you have 2 basic
We're going
ways.
to balance it. We have to balance the budget.
Okay,
we are
you can either
mandated.
raise taxes or you can cut spending. Now, wasn't there a statewide measure that just passed that said that you need 2/3 majority in the legislature in order to raise taxes?
We're not going to be raising taxes.
So you can't
David.
raise taxes.
We're not going to raise taxes.
So you have to cut programs.
We're going to have to cut programs. We're going to have to cut spending.
You have to cut spending. Is there a significant difference between what one party wants to cut versus the other party?
Some. No,
But mostly there's a lot of common ground.
We're getting closer. We really are, because just the nature of the budget, we're closer than we think. It boils down to a few programs that certain people want to protect and that we can't. So, it'll all, and David, it will all hit the fan eventually. And the right programs will survive. And if they don't, if a good program dies, you know what will happen? When times get a little better, that program will be back. I believe that. So we're going to be in some tough times for a little while.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that we have law. I'm glad that we have a constitution. People say that we're taught that, well, this is a democracy. And this is really, technically, this is not a democracy. This is a democratic republic where we have the rule of law, which in this case is the Constitution of the state of Washington, that says you have to do these things, you have to balance the budget, you have to cut spending. And so that limits what the democracy can do. And that's where we pledge allegiance to the republic for which it stands, says this is not pledge allegiance to the democracy. Democracy is subservient to the rule of law, which is the Constitution. I'm so glad that we got a Constitution, because I can imagine if we didn't have that, they're just going to borrow and borrow and borrow and spend, and there won't be any limit.
I actually ran against a candidate that felt like the state of Washington should be able to run a deficit and didn't have to balance its budget, and that it should have the opportunity to print its own money. Is that a little scary?
That last one's a little...
Yeah! Yeah, that'll take your breath away.
But there must be other states that don't have that provision in their state constitution that says, hey, you want to be able to balance your budget, just borrow. Yeah. There must be other states that can do that.
And there might be, and I'm not aware of it. All I know is what we have in the state of Washington is we're going to balance that, but we have to. We're under mandate, under law, to balance the budget. The voters have spoken. They do not want an increase in taxes. They want us to live within our means, and we're going to do that. And there's going to be some tough choices, but you know what? Everyone's going to be okay through this. We're going to be fine.
And I believe we will. And it's again, there's no choice. You have to make the tough choices. You have to do the fiscally responsible thing.
We do.
And I guess what we need is at the national level, we need to have that constraint that says, hey, you got to live within your means too. You got to balance that budget.
They're getting there. I think they're starting to see the light. They are.
Hopefully before we go over the cliff.
Yeah, I hope so too. Thanks so much, David.
Thank you, Paul.
You bet.